My straight roommate told me he liked me twice in one day. The first time, I laughed it off. The second time, my whole world quietly shifted. If someone had told me a year ago that sharing a two-bedroom apartment with the nicest guy I'd ever met would become the most emotionally confusing experience of my life, I would have blamed the lack of sleep during finals. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 24, a graduate architecture student, and I've become dangerously good at pretending everything is fine, especially around Noah Brooks. Noah is the kind of person who somehow makes ordinary Tuesdays feel brighter without even trying. He leaves the last slice of pizza because he remembers I like cold leftovers. He replaces the empty coffee filters before I notice they're gone. He always knocks before opening my bedroom door, even when he's borrowing the vacuum. None of those things should matter, but somehow they all do. Living with someone means learning the soundtrack of their life. I know Noah whistles when he's making pancakes on Saturday mornings. I know he hums old country songs while folding laundry, even though he claims he doesn't like country music. I know exactly how his footsteps sound after a 12-hour shift at the fitness center because they're slower than usual, followed by the soft clink of his keys landing in the ceramic bowl by the front door. I also know something he doesn't. Every single one of those little moments has quietly become my favorite part of the day. That's the problem with harmless crushes. They never stay harmless for long. So I created rules. Rule number 1, never stare for too long. Rule number 2, never mistake kindness for flirting. Rule number 3, absolutely never fall in love with your roommate. The first 2 were difficult. The third one failed months ago. Thankfully, Noah had no idea. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. That Monday morning started like every other one. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, painting golden squares across the counter while the coffee maker struggled like it needed another vacation. Noah stood at the island wearing a faded gray sweatshirt and athletic shorts, scrolling through his phone with the sleepy expression of someone who hadn't fully joined the world yet. "Morning," he said with an easy smile. "Morning," I answered far too quickly, then focused on pouring cereal as if breakfast required advanced engineering. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." He slid his laptop toward me. "Would you mind looking over my presentation before I leave? You're way better with layouts than I am." Architecture students never really stop fixing other people's formatting, so I nodded. 20 minutes disappeared while I adjusted fonts, cleaned up slides, and rearranged images. Noah watched over my shoulder with complete trust, occasionally asking questions that somehow turned into jokes. We laughed more than we worked. When I finally pushed the laptop back toward him, he looked at the screen, then at me. His smile softened into something quieter. "You know," he said, "I like you." Everything inside me froze. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's dog barked once. My brain, however, had completely stopped processing reality. Then Noah grinned, completely unaware of the earthquake he'd just caused. "You're seriously the best roommate I've ever had." I smiled because that was what normal people were supposed to do after hearing something like that. I even managed a quiet laugh as I reached for my coffee mug. "Right," I said. "Best roommate." The words tasted strangely heavier than they should have. Noah tossed his backpack over one shoulder, grabbed the travel mug I had filled for him without thinking, and pointed at me with a grin. "Do not work too hard today, Professor Floor Plans." I rolled my eyes. "I am not a professor." "Not yet." He opened the apartment door, paused for a second, and added, "Seriously, thanks again, Ethan." Then he disappeared into the hallway. The apartment suddenly felt twice as quiet. It was amazing how one person leaving could take all the warmth with them. I stood there staring at the closed door until the coffee maker let out an annoyed little beep, reminding me that life insisted on continuing whether my heart had embarrassed itself or not. "Congratulations," I muttered to myself. "You officially got excited because your roommate complimented you." I picked up my mug and leaned against the kitchen counter. The city outside our fourth-floor apartment was already wide awake. Delivery trucks rumbled down the street. Someone across the courtyard was unsuccessfully trying to teach a golden retriever to fetch. Somewhere below, a car horn protested the existence of morning traffic. Everything looked completely ordinary, which felt almost offensive considering the emotional circus happening inside my head. By lunchtime, I had convinced myself that I had overreacted. Noah was friendly with everyone. He remembered birthdays, held doors open, and somehow knew every cashier within a 3-block radius by name. Of course he would casually tell someone he liked them. That was simply who he was. My phone buzzed while I was adjusting a digital building model in the architecture studio. Noah had sent a picture of a sandwich that looked far too expensive for a weekday lunch. The caption read, "They forgot the pickles again." I stared at the message longer than any reasonable person should have before typing, "Justice will be served. Sue them." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then another message arrived. "You are making fun of my pain." I smiled despite myself. Maybe a little. A laughing emoji popped onto the screen, followed by, "Save me some pasta tonight? I will probably get home late. You always make it better than I do." It was such a simple exchange. 2 roommates deciding on dinner. Nothing romantic. Nothing mysterious. Yet my mood lifted so easily that it was honestly embarrassing. The afternoon passed in blueprints, measurements, and polite conversations that I barely remembered. My classmates noticed I seemed distracted. I blamed deadlines. They accepted the excuse because architecture students were always distracted by something. When I finally walked home just after 6, the apartment greeted me with familiar silence. I started boiling water, chopped fresh basil, and opened the windows to let the cool spring air drift through the kitchen. As sunlight faded into soft shades of orange, I caught myself setting out 2 plates. Without thinking, it felt less like preparing dinner and more like waiting for someone who had quietly become the definition of home. The front door clicked open a little after 8:30. I looked up from the stove just as Noah stepped inside, his hair slightly messy from the evening breeze and his sweatshirt draped over one shoulder. "Something smells incredible," he said, setting his keys into the ceramic bowl. "Please tell me that is for both of us." I was considering eating both servings myself, I replied. "Fair." He laughed, but I would take that personally. There it was again. That laugh. Light enough to fill every corner of the apartment without ever asking permission. We settled into our usual routine as if the strange moment from breakfast had never happened. We talked about work, about my latest studio project, about the elderly woman at the grocery store who had somehow convinced Noah to buy a family-sized package of chocolate chip cookies because she insisted they reminded her of her grandson. He told the story with dramatic hand gestures that somehow made it even funnier, and by the end I was laughing hard enough that I nearly dropped my fork. "See," Noah said with a satisfied smile. "I knew you needed that." I shook my head. "You are impossible. You keep saying that, but you have not kicked me out yet." After dinner, I carried the plates to the sink before Noah could stop me. He usually insisted on washing dishes whenever I cooked, but tonight he gently nudged me aside with his shoulder. "Sit down," he said. "You cooked. I have got this." "You do not have to." "I know." He turned on the faucet. "I want to." I watched him for a second longer than I should have before escaping to the living room with my laptop. My assignment was waiting. Deadlines were waiting. Real life was waiting. Unfortunately, so was my attention span, and it had apparently moved into the kitchen with Noah. Every few minutes I found myself glancing up. He was humming again. Same off-key country song. Same absent-minded smile while drying plates with the faded blue dish towel we had owned since moving in together. It struck me that happiness sometimes looked incredibly ordinary. Around 9:30, he flopped onto the opposite end of the couch with a dramatic sigh. My feet officially quit. "Long day?" I asked. 3 new clients, 2 canceled appointments, and 1 little kid who challenged me to a push-up contest. I laughed. "Who won?" He looked deeply offended. "The child. He cheated by being 9 years old." Another laugh escaped before I could stop it. Noah leaned back, watching me with an expression that was softer than usual. Not romantic. Not obvious. Just thoughtful. "What?" I asked. "Nothing." He smiled to himself. "It is just nice hearing you laugh." My heart stumbled over itself. Before I could think of anything remotely intelligent to say, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned for a split second, then silenced the notification without replying. I pretended not to notice, but a few minutes later it buzzed again. Then again. "Everything okay?" I asked carefully. "Yeah." He shrugged. "Just someone from work." He set the phone face down on the coffee table and looked back at me instead. Really looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever think people spend so much time trying to be who they are supposed to be that they forget to notice who they actually are?" The question landed between us like a pebble dropped into perfectly still water. I blinked. "That is oddly philosophical for a Tuesday night." He laughed quietly, but there was something distant behind it. Maybe I have just been thinking too much lately. The conversation lingered in my mind long after we both disappeared into our own rooms. I stared at the ceiling instead of my unfinished sketches, replaying Noah's question over and over until it no longer sounded hypothetical. It sounded personal. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe my hopelessly optimistic heart had started translating every ordinary sentence into something extraordinary. That was a dangerous habit. Around 10:45, the apartment lights flickered once, then twice. A second later, everything went completely dark. The soft hum of the refrigerator vanished. The heating system fell silent. Even the hallway outside seemed to pause. Seriously? Noah called. From his room. Did we forget to pay the electric bill? I paid it 3 days ago, I answered. Then the universe owes us an apology. I laughed quietly as I reached into the kitchen drawer, where we kept a flashlight and a handful of emergency candles. By the time I found them, Noah had wandered into the living room, guided only by the glow from his phone screen. The tiny beam illuminated one side of his face, while the rest disappeared into soft shadows. Well, he said, this suddenly became very dramatic. You watch too many movies. That is a fair criticism. I lit 2 candles and placed them on the coffee table. Warm lights spread through the apartment, replacing the darkness with gentle gold instead of harsh white. Familiar furniture suddenly looked different. Softer. Slower. Outside, rain had started tapping against the windows, and distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline. Noah looked toward the glass. Looks like we are not going anywhere tonight. I was not planning to. Good. The word came out so naturally that neither of us acknowledged it. We settled onto opposite ends of the couch with steaming mugs of tea. Without the television, without our phones, and without the usual background noise, the apartment felt strangely peaceful. The silence was never uncomfortable with Noah. Somehow it always felt like another language we both understood. After several quiet minutes, he finally spoke. Can I tell you something without you laughing? I have never laughed at anything important. He nodded slowly, staring into his mug. Today at work, one of my clients asked if I had someone waiting for me at home. I smiled. What did you tell them? I said yes. My eyebrows lifted. That is technically true. I do live here. I know. He smiled faintly. But then they asked if I was excited to get home. I waited. Noah rubbed his thumb against the side of the mug before looking directly at me. His expression held none of the playful confidence he usually carried so effortlessly. Instead, there was uncertainty, almost as if he was searching for the right words while hoping they would find him first. I realized I spend most of my day looking forward to seeing you. The room became impossibly still. Rain continued whispering against the windows. One candle flickered as a draft drifted through the apartment. Noah took a slow breath, never looking away. Ethan, he said quietly, I like you. He did not smile afterward. He did not add another explanation. He did not say the words roommate or friend. He simply sat there beneath the warm candlelight, waiting, while every careful rule I had spent months building quietly fell apart inside my chest. For a moment, I forgot how breathing worked. Every sensible response I had rehearsed over countless imaginary conversations simply vanished. I searched Noah's face, expecting the familiar grin, the playful shrug, the inevitable sentence that would explain everything away. It never came. He simply watched me with patient, nervous eyes, as though he had finally said something that had been living inside him for a very long time. I opened my mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Noah, was all I managed. He gave a tiny nod. I know. His voice was almost a whisper. It is a lot. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the windows with steady rhythm. Somewhere in the building a door closed, reminding me that the rest of the world was still moving while ours had somehow stopped. I looked down at my tea, now barely warm, mostly because looking anywhere else felt impossible. My heart wanted to sprint toward him. My mind grabbed it by the sleeve and begged it to slow down. You said something similar this morning, I finally said. I did. But that time, I called you the best roommate I ever had. I nodded carefully. This feels different. Noah let out a slow breath that sounded as though he had been holding it for hours. Because it is different. Silence settled between us again, but it no longer felt empty. It felt fragile, like a sheet of glass neither of us wanted to crack with the wrong words. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I have been trying to understand what is happening to me for weeks. He laughed once, softly, though there was very little humor in it. Maybe months. I listened without interrupting. At first I thought I was just getting attached because we spend so much time together. Then I started noticing that the best part of every day was coming home. Not because of the apartment. He looked up. Because you were here. My chest tightened. Noah had always been confident. Seeing uncertainty on his face felt almost unreal. I have never had feelings like this before, he admitted. So I kept telling myself they would disappear if I ignored them. He smiled to himself, almost embarrassed. That strategy has not been very successful. I could not help smiling back. Mine either. The words slipped out before I had time to stop them. Noah blinked. What do you mean? I immediately looked away. Nothing. Ethan. My name sounded different coming from him now. Gentler. More careful. Please do not say nothing if it is actually something. I laughed nervously and rubbed the back of my neck. You know, architecture teaches people to hide mistakes behind good design. And apparently I tried doing that with my feelings too. His eyes widened just enough for me to notice. Neither of us spoke after that. We simply sat there in the warm candlelight while the storm carried on outside, both realizing that the distance between us had quietly become much smaller than either of us had ever expected, yet neither of us was quite ready to take the next step. Neither of us moved for what felt like several minutes. The candles continued burning quietly between us, their small flames dancing whenever the wind brushed against the old window frames. I had imagined confessing my feelings to Noah more times than I cared to admit, but never like this. Never with him looking just as uncertain as I felt. He let out a slow breath and leaned back against the couch. Can I be honest? He asked. I smiled faintly. I think we are past pretending. He laughed under his breath. Fair enough. He rubbed both hands together, searching for the right place to begin. I have always thought I knew exactly who I was. It never seemed complicated. I dated girls. I never questioned it. I never had a reason to. He looked toward the rain-covered window instead of at me. Then somewhere along the way, things started changing. I stayed quiet. He needed someone to listen more than someone to answer. It was never one big moment, he continued. It was hundreds of little ones. His smile returned, softer this time. Looking forward to movie nights. Wondering if you had eaten lunch. Picking up your favorite coffee without thinking about it. Hearing your key in the front door after class and realizing my whole mood changed because you were home. I felt warmth spread across my face. Noah shook his head with an embarrassed laugh. I kept making excuses. I told myself that was just what best friends did. But then people started asking questions. He glanced toward the phone, still resting face down on the coffee table. The messages tonight were from a coworker trying to set me up on a date. I blinked. You never answered. Because every time I thought about saying yes, something felt wrong. He smiled awkwardly. Not because she was not nice. She is great. I just kept comparing everyone to someone else. His eyes finally met mine again. The apartment seemed impossibly quiet. Even the rain had begun to soften into a gentle drizzle. Do you know what scared me the most? He asked. I slowly shook my head. It was not realizing I cared about you. He paused. It was realizing how terrified I became whenever I imagined you moving out someday. My heart tightened. I would walk into this apartment and hear nothing. No music from your room. No coffee brewing before class. No books scattered across the table. Just silence. He swallowed carefully. That silence suddenly felt unbearable. I looked down at my hands, trying to steady my breathing. Every ordinary memory we had built together suddenly carried a completely different meaning. Noah smiled to himself. I spent weeks trying to convince myself this would pass. I even avoided coming home early because I thought maybe some distance would fix whatever was happening inside my head. He laughed once. Instead, I just missed you more. A quiet smile escaped before I could stop it. That was not a very successful experiment. It was a complete disaster, he admitted. I finally realized I was not confused about my feelings. He looked at me with a calm honesty that made every word feel unmistakably real. I was only confused because I had never expected the person I would fall for to already be sitting across from me every single evening. My words seemed to surprise both of us. I had spent months hiding them behind jokes, late-night study sessions, and carefully measured smiles. Yet the moment they finally escaped, they felt strangely peaceful. Noah did not rush to fill the silence. He simply looked at me with the same gentle patience he had always shown whenever I needed extra time to explain a design idea or untangle a difficult thought. How long? He asked quietly. I laughed under my breath, mostly because admitting the truth felt both terrifying and ridiculous. Long enough that I stopped counting. His eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. Before we moved in together? I nodded. I thought it would disappear once we became roommates. Did it? It got worse. That earned a warm, genuine laugh from him. I am sorry. I should not laugh. No, I said with a smile. Honestly, I would laugh too. I leaned back against the couch and finally let myself tell the story I had carried alone for so long. The first week we lived here, you made pancakes because you noticed I skipped breakfast before class. You left one on a plate with a sticky note that said, "Do not try to survive on coffee alone." I still have that note tucked inside one of my sketchbooks. Noah blinked in surprise. You kept it. Apparently, I keep everything that reminds me of you. I covered my face for a second and groaned softly. That sounded much smoother in my head. I liked it, he admitted. We both laughed, and for the first time that evening the tension loosened just enough for us to breathe. I looked around the apartment that had quietly become the backdrop of so many ordinary memories. The bookshelf we built together after arguing over the instructions for an hour. The coffee table with a tiny scratch from when we accidentally dropped a toolbox. The crooked houseplant Noah insisted was thriving despite all available evidence. Every corner carried a story that belonged to both of us. Do you know why I never said anything? I asked. Noah slowly shook his head. Because I thought you were happy exactly the way things were. I was afraid that if I confessed, I would lose my best friend, my roommate, and the place that felt most like home. My voice softened. Loving you quietly seemed easier than risking all of that. Noah looked down for a long moment before speaking. I spent months thinking I was protecting our friendship by staying silent too. He smiled with gentle disbelief. We are apparently two spectacularly bad communicators. That might explain why it took architecture student logic and fitness trainer stubbornness this long to reach the same conclusion. He laughed again, shaking his head. Probably. The candles had almost burned halfway down now, filling the apartment with a warm amber glow that made everything feel calmer than it had an hour earlier. Noah met my eyes once more, and this time there was no uncertainty hiding behind them. Ethan, he said softly, I cannot promise that I already understand every part of what I am feeling, but I do know one thing with complete certainty. I waited. His smile grew, small but unwavering. The future I keep imagining always has you in it, and I do not want to spend another day pretending that is just a coincidence. The words stayed with us long after they were spoken. Neither of us seemed interested in rushing toward some perfect movie ending. Instead, we simply existed together inside the quiet apartment that had witnessed every ordinary moment leading us here. Noah reached for his mug again, realized it was empty, and laughed softly. Cold tea, he said. I guess we were distracted. Just a little. I smiled. He stood and walked into the kitchen without saying anything else. A moment later, I heard the kettle filling with water. It was such a familiar sound that it immediately settled my nerves. I followed him, stopping beside the counter while he waited for the water to boil. We had stood in this exact spot hundreds of times before, talking about classes, grocery lists, rent, and weekend plans. Tonight felt different, yet strangely the same. Comfortable. Safe. Noah rested both hands on the countertop and looked over at me. Can I ask for one favor? Anything. He hesitated, searching for the right words. Can we not feel like we have to figure out our entire future tonight? I let out a relieved laugh. You have no idea how happy I am to hear you say that. Really, I have spent the last 20 minutes imagining every possible outcome. He grinned. Architecture brain? Architecture brain. Fitness trainer brain is not much better, he admitted. Mine just keeps trying to solve emotional problems like they are workout schedules. I laughed again, and somehow everything felt lighter. The kettle began to whistle. Noah poured fresh tea into 2 mugs before handing one to me with the same quiet thoughtfulness he always had. Our fingers brushed for the briefest moment. Neither of us pulled away immediately. It was such a small thing, almost laughably ordinary, yet it carried more meaning than either of us needed to explain. Noah smiled, almost shyly. Would it be strange if I held your hand? The question was so careful that it made my chest ache. There was no pressure in his voice. No expectation. Just kindness. I answered the only way I honestly could. No, I do not think it would. He slowly reached toward me, giving me every chance to change my mind. When our hands finally met, it felt less like something new and more like something that had quietly been waiting for us all along. His hand was warm from the mug he had been holding. Mine was probably shaking more than I wanted to admit. We stood there smiling at each other with the kind of awkward happiness that could never be rehearsed. Outside, the rain finally began to fade. The power returned with a sudden click, flooding the apartment with bright ceiling lights. Both of us blinked at the unexpected brightness before laughing at exactly the same time. Noah looked around the now fully lit apartment and then back at me. I kind of like the candles. Me too. He gave my hand one gentle squeeze before letting go, not because he wanted to, but because he wanted me to know that every step from this moment forward would be taken together, patiently, honestly, and at the same pace. 1 year later, the apartment looked almost exactly the same. Yet somehow everything about it had changed. The blue couch was still slightly crooked because we had never bothered fixing one uneven leg. The bookshelf still leaned just enough to make visiting friends nervous. The stubborn little houseplant Noah had refused to throw away was somehow alive after all, proving that optimism occasionally deserved to win. Saturday mornings still began with pancakes, except now we cooked them together. I still reminded Noah to slow down when he ate too quickly before heading to the gym. He still reminded me that architecture projects were allowed to be finished before 2 o'clock in the morning. Our routines had not disappeared. They had simply become promises we quietly kept for each other every single day. Looking back, I realized nothing magical had happened overnight. There had been conversations, awkward moments, honest questions neither of us had immediate answers to. We learned that caring about someone was less about dramatic declarations and more about choosing them again and again in ordinary moments. Noah learned that he did not have to fit inside anyone else's expectations to understand his own heart. I learned that protecting myself by staying silent had nearly cost me the happiest chapter of my life. One sunny afternoon, a few months after that rainy evening, our friend Olivia stopped by to return a borrowed blender. She looked around the apartment, noticed 2 identical coffee mugs sitting beside each other on the counter, then smiled with the unmistakable expression of someone who had figured everything out before either of us said a word. "So," she asked casually, "are you two still roommates?" Noah looked at me first. It was a small glance, lasting barely a second, but it carried an entire conversation. I smiled back before either of us answered. "Technically," Noah said with a laugh, "yes." Olivia folded her arms. "Technically." Noah stepped closer until our shoulders lightly touched. "We still split the rent. We still argue about whose turn it is to buy groceries," I added. "And he still leaves wet towels in the bathroom," I said. Noah gasped dramatically. "One time. Twice. Allegedly." We all laughed. Olivia shook her head. "You two are impossible." "Probably," Noah admitted. After she left, the apartment became quiet again. Golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the hardwood floor just as it had on the day we first moved in. Noah stood beside me, smiling toward the city outside before turning back. "Do you remember that morning when I thanked you for fixing my presentation?" he asked. "I remember every embarrassing second of it." He laughed. "I thought I was being subtle." "You were not." "Good." He reached for my hand with the same gentle patience he had shown that night when he first asked if he could hold it. Some things, I had learned, never stopped feeling special no matter how often they happened. I squeezed his hand and smiled. The apartment that once taught me how difficult it was to hide my feelings had quietly become the place where neither of us had to hide anything at all, and for the first time in a very long time, coming home no longer meant hoping for something impossible. It simply meant finding the person who had been home all along.